The story starts with a couple on a date where the guy is telling a story about the fourth progenitor, who is supposed to be a strong and ruthless vampire. The girl then trips, revealing some of her skin, which is noticed by a man named Kojou. He starts to see some bizarre visions of bloodthirst before starting to bleed from his nose. While hanging out with his friends, Kojou talks like a normal person who has school and exam issues much like any other student would. On his way back home, he notices that a girl has been following him for some time. After being unable to shake her off, he decides to confront her head-on since she had worn a uniform from his school. Upon seeing him, the stalker named Himeragi instantly backs off, calling him the fourth progenitor. He is taken aback by this but decides to play it safe and tells her that she got the wrong person. He intended to leave her behind, but after seeing her get surrounded by some guys, he decides to observe for a while. He notices demon registration bands on their hands and realizes these are no normal people. She tries to shrug them off without force, but after they get a bit violent, Himeragi uses her powers to instantly take them down. They immediately turn into monsters after the initial attack, and one of them is even a D-class vampire. The vampire then unleashes a flurry of magical power, causing the surroundings to go on lockdown and the people to evacuate. They even summon a familiar to fight her, but she is too strong for them. Just when she is about to end the vampire with her spear, Kojou interferes and gives them a chance to run away. Himeragi points out that a normal human being wouldn't be able to stop her spear, Walls her, essentially blowing out his cover. She still isn't sure about him, and after the conversation goes a bit off track, she leaves without causing more trouble. Kojou then describes that the place he lives in, Itogami Island, is a man-made district in Japan. This place is infamous for its unusual amount of demon population, giving it the name Demon District. The place is a sanctuary for species of monsters that are on the verge of extinction, like mermaids, vampires, spirits, and half-demons to say the least. Within this district, Kojou once was a normal high school student until 3 months ago when he became the fourth progenitor. During their encounter, Himeragi dropped her school ID, so he goes to the school to return it to her. While checking her wallet, he gets a pleasant smell, causing his vampire urges to spike. He starts bleeding in broad daylight, only for Himeragi to see him with her wallet in hand. In exchange for her wallet, he asks who she was and why she was following him the other day. Instead of answering, Himeragi sees it fit to just beat the wallet out of his hand as they prepare to clash. Just when she was about to pull her weapon out, her stomach rumbled, causing Kojou to notice that she was hungry. All of this was because he had her wallet with him for an entire day. In a quick turn of events, he returns her wallet and she even treats him to lunch. He is surprised to see that someone uptight like her would choose to eat hamburgers at a fast food joint. While talking, she reveals that she is part of the Lion King organization, which is responsible for keeping magical disasters and terrorism in check. Himeragi is a Sword Shaman who was sent specifically to this island to keep an eye on Kojou. According to her, his status as the fourth progenitor is an act of terror in itself. Kojou is oblivious to all this and is rather worried that he isn't even considered to be a living person. He tells her that he has no ulterior motive and that he started living on the island after being turned into a vampire. Himeragi cannot believe that a normal human could be turned into not just a strong vampire, but a progenitor of all things. He tries to recall the incident of meeting the previous fourth progenitor and being their heir. But as soon as he tries, a sharp pain prevents him from remembering those events. Seeing him in a vulnerable state is enough to convince Himeragi that he wasn't lying. As such, she decides to stick around with him as a companion just to observe his status and keep things in check. We then see a flashback sequence of a girl named Aurora, seemingly sacrificing herself and leaving her wishes to Kojou. In a flashback involving Himeragi, the higher-ups from the Lion King organization tell her about the Sacred Treaty. This treaty was established in the presence of the three progenitors, meaning the existence of the fourth is a threat to the treaty itself. They then give her the spear and order her to observe Kojou, and if need be, eliminate him on the spot. Back in the present, Himeragi has taken some very intricate measures to ensure her mission is in full motion. She even rents a room next to Kojou's. He is not against this decision and offers to help her if she needs anything. In school, Kojou is in a bit of a situation involving his English teacher. Natsuki is one of the few people who knows about his real identity and keeps warning him to make sure it remains a secret. He asks her about the Lion King organization and she explains that they are the enemy of people like herself and him. She warns him to avoid any members of that organization and it's best to stay out of their interests. Later, Kojou takes Himeragi to do a bit of shopping since she doesn't have a lot of essentials in her apartment. She acts a bit foreign to most of the basic tools but is happy to have spent time searching with him. Outside the apartment, the two bump into Nagisa, the younger sister of Kojou, who also happened to be Himeragi's friend. The siblings invite her to dine with them, and Himeragi starts to help Kojou with his homework. They are much more comfortable with each other, and Kojou shares some personal feelings about wanting to change the world with his power, but being unable to do so. This little human insight into Kojou changes her opinion of him a bit, as she starts to see him more as a person than a catastrophic disaster. Later that night, Kojou heads out only to see Himeragi right outside, soaked in water. She points out that she came out of her bath and she must follow him no matter where he goes. Kojou notices her interest in a crane game. He asks if she had played it before, to which she says she hasn't. He then plays the game and successfully fetches the toy before being questioned by Natsuki about what they were doing out so late. Thanks to an explosion nearby, Natsuki is distracted long enough for them to escape without her discovering their identity. The explosion was caused by a familiar dragon, which is too dangerous to be ignored. Kojou attempts to deal with it, but Himeragi tells him that the fourth progenitor should make his moves carefully. She tells him to return home and that she would handle the situation by herself. Himeragi takes notice of the familiar's master going rampant in the city. She hurries to get him on time, but sees someone using consuming magic to stop the dragon before her. The user instantly absorbs the dragon and puts down the master in a single blow to his chest. Himeragi confronts him and explains that what he did was a crime according to the Lion King organization's ethics. He ignores her warning and prepares to land the final blow on the injured user, but Himeragi interferes in time to save him. The culprit is surprised to see Schneewalzer in her hands, recognizing it as the ultimate weapon created by the Lion King organization. He announces himself as Combat Deacon Rudolf Ustok of Lotharingia. Upon hearing this, Himeragi finds out that he is an exorcist from the West European Church. The fight breaks down and Himeragi is relentless with the barrage of spear attacks that Rudolf manages to block. He is impressed by her skill and calls upon his familiar Astarte, who leaps from behind and attacks Himeragi. She manages to momentarily fend off Astarte, but he uses this opening to attempt a cheap shot on her. Just as his punch was about to catch her, she starts to think about Kojou and whether he would be sad if she were to die there. Luckily for her, Kojou manages to get there in time and defend her from what could have been a fatal attack. The user doesn't engage Kojou directly and sends Astarte instead. Astarte is fast enough to land a heavy blow on him, even causing a deep wound, after which Kojou starts to scream and lose control. We then cut to the day after the incident where the whole city is reporting the massive destruction caused by their fight. Himeragi and Kojou are fine, but according to her, he caused an explosion damaging 50 billion yen worth of property. Despite this, she doesn't hold anything against him regarding the incident, and thanks him for saving her life. She still has to make a report to the Lion King organization, but assures him that she will testify on his behalf. They then discuss the explosion he caused, and he begins to briefly explain his powers as the fourth progenitor. Despite inheriting the title and the powers from the previous progenitor, Kojou still hasn't been approved by the familiars. He explains how he can control the familiars and their subsequent powers under normal circumstances. However, if things get out of hand like last night, he would eventually lose control. He points out that the reason for their disapproval is the fact that he is a virgin vampire. In the eyes of the familiars, being a virgin is not sucking anyone's blood, which makes the vampire inexperienced. Their conversation is interrupted by Kojou's friend Yaze, and Himeragi leaves to avoid suspicion regarding her spear. In class, Asagi, a programmer at the Man-Made Island Management Corporation, talks to Kojou about the explosion. He praises her for being such an important part of a company like that, making her blush. She then gets to the point and asks him about the girl he was hanging out with the other day. Just as she talks about this, a bunch of guys approach him and show him Himeragi's picture. They ask him if her sister was in the same class as her and want him to introduce her to them. Natsuki then comes into the class looking for Kojou. She tells him to meet her and bring Himeragi, wanting to talk about why the two of them ran away together last night. The class isn't happy to hear about his engagement with Himeragi, not to mention that they were meeting up late at night. Asagi is particularly angry about the situation and makes it apparent by tearing up the report she was supposed to give him. In the office, Natsuki explains how incidents like this have been more frequent and the criminal has not been caught yet. She suspects that Kojou might be attacked once again, and so Kojou is prohibited from leaving his place during the night. On their way out, Himeragi suspects that what they fought last night was a homunculus, and police are not aware that the criminals are actually from the West European Church. She explains that the deacon's involvement is a large-scale issue, and it is not wise to disclose such information to the police. She also mentions that they can use this chance to prove that he was responsible for the death of an old-world vampire, and rid Kojou of any criminal charges. Himeragi conducted a small investigation and located various West European Church hideouts throughout the island. She presents it to Kojou since the two of them are obliged to catch the deacon. He points out that someone like the deacon, who is a Lotharingian, would be least suspected among his people. They use this information to deduce that the deacon should be hiding in a corporation located in Lotharingia itself. He goes to Asagi to ask for her help locating businesses out of Lotharingia. She is reluctant at first but quickly agrees to aid him. She finds out a relevant location at Island North called Shelt Pharmaceuticals, which also involves itself in the research of homunculi. They do not waste time and head directly to the site, seeing it as a perfect hideout for someone like the deacon. She advises him to stay put as he is not very helpful in battle, but he disagrees, displaying his worry for her. She is flattered by his sentiment and decides to give in to his insistence with the condition that he must leave immediately if they encounter the combat deacon. They head deeper into the facility and see a bunch of homunculi stored inside large pods. Just as they are exploring the place trying to figure out what exactly those things were, they are confronted by Astarte. Astarte looks as if she just exited a pod herself and tells them to leave the place as soon as they can. She points out that the island is about to sink. She tells them that the island is of transient earth floating over an intersection. Once the cornerstone is lost, the island will collapse. The combat deacon appears from above and tells them that they plan to find the eternal treasure, which is the same cornerstone. He tells them that Astarte was injected with a familiar and doesn't have more than 2 weeks to live, after which the familiar will completely take over her. His plans don't sit well with Kojou, who gets angry and unleashes a burst of lightning, revealing his familiar momentarily. Astarte attacks the two on the deacon's command and quickly pins them down. The deacon then attempts to strike a vulnerable Himeragi with his axe, only for Kojou to come in between and take the strike on his back. He finally finishes off the deal by beheading Kojou, leaving Himeragi to embrace his head as his body falls.